Welcome everybody. Now in the news today, we read that Airbus unveiled a 30E concept aircraft with differing hydrogen turbofan and turboprop engine configurations, which they say will lead the way to a zero emissions aviation industry. So what better time to be holding this highly topical and timely online session regarding the future developments and opportunities in hydrogen. I'm Virginia Birrell. I'm the CEO of the Australia-China Business Council in Victoria, and I warmly welcome you all to this collaboration between ACBC Victoria and the CSIRO with generous support from ShineWing Australia. We'll shortly hear from our speakers and then move to a Q&A session. We've received pre-submitted questions, and if time permits, we'll be pleased to answer any further questions that you might like to add to the Q&A section in the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get through as many as possible. A reminder that this event is being recorded and it will be made available on the ACBC website in the Member Insights Centre after the event. As the world looks forever changed by COVID-19, renewed focus is placed on national energy production. Australia has released its National Hydrogen Strategy, looking to become a major global player in clean energy hydrogen by 2030, exporting a forecast 42% of regional supply by 2040. More recently, the first low emissions technology statement was released by Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor, flagging public investment in 5 areas, including hydrogen. Meanwhile, China has just committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2060, but observers warn, as the world's largest coal consumer, using more than the rest of the world combined, China faces a daunting task of reaching its goals. Kicking its coal habit will be particularly hard. To guide us through the developments and opportunities in hydrogen in Australia, as well as between scientists from CSIRO and the Chinese Academy of Sciences, I'm pleased to introduce Patrick Hartley, leader of the CSIRO Hydrogen Energy Mission, and Andrea Galt, New Energy Partnership Program Director from Woodside Energy. They are arguably 2 of the most qualified people in Australia to speak on this topic. Moderating Q&A to follow the presentations will be our ACBC Victorian President, Matt Schofield from ShineWing Australia, and he has energy and resources sectors as his key focuses with that organisation. Now over to Patrick to lead off the presentations. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Virginia, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to ACBC about a topic that's particularly dear to my heart, I suppose, in the work that we're doing in CSIRO in this area. I'll just give a little bit of an intro from the CSIRO perspective, but before I do that, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands in which we meet. In my case, that's the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So Virginia's already really spoken about some of the government announcements in the area of hydrogen, which I was going to talk a little bit about as well. I guess importantly, recent government analysis has shown that the hydrogen industry for Australia could create more than 8,000 jobs, generate about $11 billion a year in GDP, and reduce Australia's greenhouse gas emissions by up to 135 million tonnes by 2050. And so the commitment that the government has made through the National Hydrogen Strategy and as Virginia said most recently, the Low Emission Technology Statement is really firming up the support for the development of this industry in the Australian context. So CSIRO is supporting the vision of a clean and competitive hydrogen industry in 3 main ways. Firstly, we work with government and industry stakeholders to provide the trusted advice which they require to make informed investment decisions. And this advice takes a number of forms. Specific examples are our work to support the Low Emissions Technology Statement, which we spoke about, where we did quite a lot of work on modelling of hydrogen cost and economics. And another example, an earlier example of which we're particularly proud, was the National Hydrogen Roadmap, which we released in 2018, which really highlighted the hydrogen opportunity for Australia and articulated where we saw some of the lowest hanging fruit for hydrogen technology deployment in Australia. And also identify some key cost barriers which the industry must overcome if hydrogen is to become cost competitive with incumbent fossil fuel energy sources. Secondly, we are investing our own strategic research funds to develop new technologies, specifically technologies which address some of those cost barriers I just mentioned. So these range from new lab-scale hydrogen production and storage technologies right through to deployment of demonstration projects. I'm pleased to say that we're working on a current initiative to progress the installation of a hydrogen refueling facility at one of our sites here in Victoria. And finally, we really try to make sure our technologies are commercialized and reach the market by active partnerships with industry to take our technologies to the market and also to help industry develop their technologies for markets too. So they may be developed through CSIRO or actually in joint industry R&D efforts. And an example here is a significant partnership, for instance, such as our $20 million agreement with Fortescue Metal Group to jointly develop new hydrogen technologies. So this brings me to our most recent initiative in the hydrogen area, which is the development of the Hydrogen Industry Mission, which I'm leading. So the Hydrogen Industry Mission really builds on our work in the areas I've just outlined by investing in building partnerships across 4 main pillars of activity. The first of these is really responding to a clear need that's been expressed to us by both industry and government and the community for really knowledge sharing tools and modeling resources, which bring those together in a centralized place. And we're calling that centralized place our Hydrogen Knowledge Center. And an example of some of the work that's going on there is a recent partnership with the Future Fuels Cooperative Research Center, the Industry Growth Center NERA, and the National Strategy Group in our federal department, amongst other partners. Through our feasibility and strategy studies pillar, we'll continue to deliver the trusted advice, which I mentioned above, but we'll do this with greater emphasis on joint projects, both with the research community and industry players who have really complementary strengths and great experience in the area of helping those analyses and helping people really understand investment decisions. Recognizing that the current status of the industry in Australia is all about demonstration projects. We are, as I mentioned, leading the development of demonstration projects, but also supporting a number of demonstration projects around Australia. And the focus here is really on de-risking the development of hydrogen industry value chains, the learning by doing activities, which we really feel we can assist with. And finally, our enabling science and technology pillar of our industry mission, we continue to deliver both those new technologies, but also the less technological research around socioeconomic issues, which address barriers to industry development, which may be non-technological in nature. Those are things like understanding environmental impacts and social license to operate issues around hydrogen industry development. So in summary, we really see 3 distinctive features which we feel position CSIRO's hydrogen industry mission for success. The first is the alignment and commitment to develop this industry across all layers of government in Australia and many industries. The fact that the industry really is engaged and actually working to develop the new technology and deploy the technology in the Australian context. And of course, our own strong track record, which we have in delivering that trusted advice and technology and research partnerships with industry, which we feel can really make a difference to getting the industry going really in a significant way in Australia. So with that, I'll hand over to Virginia and Matt.
Thank you very much. I think we'll probably save questions till the end, Matt, if you're happy to do that. So if I could call on Andrea now to make a few comments from your area of expertise. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Virginia, and thanks for inviting me today. It's an honor and privilege to be here speaking with Patrick and to everyone who's on the call. So thanks for dialing in. So as Virginia said, my name's Andrea and I work for Woodside Energy, and we've been working on our hydrogen portfolio for nearly 3 years now, and we're called the New Energy Team. So we've undertaken the work on hydrogen because we recognize that climate change is one of the most important challenges that the world's facing right now. And in line with the Paris Agreement, Woodside's aim is to be net zero for our direct carbon emissions by 2050. As the pioneer of the LNG industry in Australia, Woodside has a significant supply of natural gas that we supply to Western Australia, which is where the headquarters of our company is, and overseas. And we believe that natural gas provides that reliable energy that comes with lower carbon than other major fossil fuels. But in addition to that, we're furthering reducing our emissions in our existing operations and putting in things like batteries for our spinning reserves and offshore platforms, which is the first time in the world that a battery has been put on an offshore platform, and that was at one of our operations over in Western Australia. We've also been, though, developing new energy and low carbon solutions like hydrogen, which will be a part of our portfolio for the future. Woodside expects to see large-scale hydrogen production around the world by 2030, and we definitely intend to be part of that. So there's a growing demand for safe, clean, reliable energy that also contributes to global decarbonization. So hydrogen, being a clean, versatile fuel that can store energy at much higher densities than battery, is absolutely one of those target energy sources. And as we all know, that when hydrogen is consumed, it only has water as the byproduct. So we believe that Woodside's experience and underpinned by our strong customer relationships positions us nicely for large-scale hydrogen production. As a company, we're focusing on two technologies, so blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. Blue would be hydrogen made from our natural gas through a process of reforming. And while the blue hydrogen does have a CO2 emission, we are committed to managing these through either offsets or technical abatement to offer a carbon neutral product. And then obviously green hydrogen being produced from water through an electrolyzer with renewable power. And as Patrick mentioned, the demonstration side of projects are really important to learn and experience, learn by doing, as he said. And we're progressing to pilot projects that are renewable hydrogen projects. So they have been shortlisted for funding from the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. And one of them is in Tasmania's Bell Bay, and that is involving a 10 megawatt pilot project size electrolyzer producing 4.5 tons of hydrogen per day. And that would be for domestic use, but the option to expand eventually for export. And our other one is at Badgingarra Wind and Solar Farm, and that's in Western Australia, also using 100% renewable power to produce hydrogen. So we're investing in relationships and knowledge to improve our understanding and the role that hydrogen can play in not just decarbonizing our own operations, but providing an opportunity for our customers to decarbonize their operations as well. Woodside also works with CSIRO, so we've sponsored the National Hydrogen Research, Development and Demonstration Report. And as Patrick mentioned, that report includes and explores the supporting role of RD&D across the hydrogen industry and multiple value chain opportunities there. It was really good to see last week at the UN General Assembly that President Xi Jinping pledged that China will neutralize all their carbon emissions by 2060. And even estimates about 100,000 hydrogen vehicles in Beijing by 2025. That's absolutely incredible, and China should be commended for such great efforts. We believe that LNG plays a major role in this energy transition, and I know that China imports a lot of LNG, and China is very interested in making hydrogen from LNG. So we believe that technology will be the enabler for China's emission reduction targets. Woodside also exports LNG to CNOOC in the Guangdong LNG terminal, and I think that Australia is really well placed to be a technology exporter as well in this new energy export space. Monash partnerships like with the Woodside Monash Energy Partnership will also enable this transition. So the Woodside Monash Energy Partnership is a combined investment of more than $40 million over 7 years. And really the purpose of that partnership is to provide collaborative problem solving for the development of a new sustainable energy transition. There's 3 research themes under that partnership. One being new energy technology. So that's looking at hydrogen production, storage, and transport. And then the second pillar is carbon capture, conversion, utilization. So really looking at how we can have affordable carbon abatement. And then the third is around energy leadership. So that's looking at policy and advocacy during the energy transition to make sure that industry, government, and universities are all working together. As part of the partnership, we also have the Woodside Building for Technology and Design, and that opened this year, and it's one of the world's most efficient and innovative teaching buildings of its type. So it has a passive house classification, which is the first building of that classification in the Southern Hemisphere. And when Melbourne opens up again, the building will be open, and so we'd love to welcome any visitors to come see it. In fact, the Woodside Monash partnership is open for business to help decarbonize the planet. So that's inclusive of any Chinese partners that would be interested. We're working on potential partnerships on hydrogen collaboration in China, and we would welcome anyone to come visit and have a look at the work that's happening at the Woodside building at the Monash campus, and work hopefully with the partnership for a lower carbon future. So thank you. Thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That's fascinating, and Patrick as well. Matthew, I just introduce you now as the president of ACBC Victoria, and hand over to you to do the moderation of the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia, and thanks for organising today's event. Great topic, and obviously, with hindsight, even better timing. So thank you. So first question today that we've had come through is for Patrick. So Patrick, there's two parts to this question. First is around service stations and obviously vehicles, and then there's a second part that talks about the broader application for the transportation sector. So question is, what will be the key drivers for hydrogen to be provided at service stations and for hydrogen vehicles to become widespread?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. It's an interesting question, and I spoke. I guess in answer to that, I spoke a little bit earlier about some of the work we did through our National Hydrogen Roadmap, which really tried to look at some of the low-hanging fruit for hydrogen technology applications in the Australian context, and transport is certainly one of those. So transport is a focus both of a number of projects in Australia and overseas. And the reason for that is because the cost of hydrogen production is actually approaching where it needs to be similar to displace the incumbent fuels, which are typically diesel and petrol in that application, relatively expensive fuels, let's say. And so the slight cost premium that hydrogen has at the moment is more competitive in these areas. But there's a very big but to this story, and that is infrastructure. And by that, I mean the cost and availability of both the vehicles that can use hydrogen and the refueling stations that can be used to refuel hydrogen vehicles. And so the cost of those aspects of this value chain in transport is still pretty prohibitive. So I think the major driver will be the rollout of cost competitive technologies for both of these. And I should point out that many manufacturers are working hard to make this happen, particularly in Australia, the likes of Hyundai and Toyota. And of course, with the huge markets like China, you can really imagine the economies of scale and the cost reductions that can be anticipated for some of that technology coming through in the next few years. But it's really about that infrastructure cost where I see the major challenge in the transport applications.
Okay.
So I think the second part of the question was around other key applications apart from transport. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. That's right, Patrick.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. I mean, there are a number of these, of course. Hydrogen. One of the great attractions of hydrogen is that it can really be used in what's called sector coupling, because hydrogen can be used as an energy vector, an energy carrier in a number of different industrial and domestic settings. So the first one I'd probably speak to is around heating. So you can use hydrogen in both domestic and industrial heating. Literally, you can burn hydrogen like you do natural gas or coal. To produce heat and energy, but in burning hydrogen, you really do it without any CO2 emissions. There's no carbon in burning hydrogen. So this is a big opportunity for using our existing natural gas networks and natural gas appliances for displacing fossil fuels from them. Either in a pure form, you can burn hydrogen in pure form, but you can actually also mix it to displace parts of natural gas, so you can reduce the overall emissions from natural gas by mixing it with hydrogen and using mixtures in that way. And that's a way of, I guess, managing that transition. As you scale up hydrogen production, you can start to displace more and more fossil fuels from the gas network. So gas and gas networks are very important. Hydrogen can also play a very big role in electricity systems. So the production of hydrogen from water using electricity is called electrolysis. And then the use of fuel cells, which effectively reverse this reaction to produce electricity, opens up new paradigms for energy storage, especially longer term storage, which batteries struggle with. So this sort of use of hydrogen as an energy storage system, which can be used to produce or consume electricity at certain times, can be used to smooth out fluctuations in renewable energy, which are currently a challenge for managing electricity grids. So that's the electricity system application. And I guess, you know, a key one really, particularly when we're talking internationally, is of course the export opportunity. And I think Andrea touched on this. So we're very lucky in Australia to have a tremendous resource, or different resources for producing hydrogen, and relatively speaking, a small energy demand due to our small population. And that means that we can, you know, given time, because it's a big scale up required to do this, we can produce hydrogen and export it potentially. And really the development of a clean energy export industry is a real game changer globally, and really could be a huge economic prize for Australia as well. Final application, I'll just do one more, and that's the industrial uses of hydrogen, which are not about heating. So hydrogen can actually be used as a chemical feedstock as well. So it's a very important, it's already the major use of hydrogen globally, which is pretty significant, is actually in producing important chemicals like ammonia. And this is obviously a very, very important ingredient in fertilizers. But there are new opportunities coming online for using hydrogen as a feedstock in things like producing steel. That's the so-called green steel, which is also a focus of the technology, low emissions technology statement, which the government announced. And so the really important thing perhaps about these industrial applications is that they can represent a really huge demand for hydrogen. And so if you have that very large demand, you can actually start through the economies of scale and supply and demand laws of economics, you can start driving dramatic reductions in the cost of hydrogen. And that can allow other applications to come online and drive the decarbonisation of different sectors. So quite a long answer and quite a few different options there, but that's why hydrogen is such an important topic. People are trying to figure out where these different applications and when they come online, importantly.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. And before I give you a rest, I've got one more question here for you that's come in. Is the government truly supportive of hydrogen as a future major fuel source? And if so, is it doing enough, or what should it be doing to push hydrogen as the fuel of the future?
Yeah, so in answer to the first part of the question, I think I can confidently say the answer is yes. I think the announcements that Virginia mentioned, and I touched on as well, around the National Hydrogen Strategy and the Low Emission Technology Statement, where hydrogen figures very, very prominently, tells us that the governments are very serious. Really important part about the National Hydrogen Strategy is it was actually adopted by federal and state and territory governments. And so you have a really broad agreement there that pursuing this development of this industry is important across the country and across all sectors of politics. So that's particularly significant, I think. And you're seeing now that many states have released or are working on their own specific hydrogen strategies. Again, so at the state level, you're seeing real money on the table as well for developing this industry. So I think the commitment is certainly there. And yes, yeah. So in short, the answer there is yes. So there's a lot of work to do still, and so much of the specific policy and funding ramifications of the recent announcements is still to be defined. Given that I work for CSIRO, I might stop short of making recommendations in the area of policy, because that's not really CSIRO's role. But I can say that CSIRO has been actively engaged in providing the scientific and techno-economic advice throughout the development of all these different priorities with both industry and governments. So we're confident that the next policy sets will be based on the best information available.
Wonderful. Thanks, Patrick. Very comprehensive response there. Now, a couple of questions for yourself, Andrea. The first one is, what is Australia's competitive advantage of becoming the biggest exporter of hydrogen?
Sure, thanks, Matt. Well, Patrick answered part of that question for me, so thanks for that, Patrick. I mean, Australia is a premier destination to become a big hydrogen exporter, and a big piece of that is the stable government and the technology roadmaps, the policies, the funding. That's all available to support the project. So definitely have the government backing for Australia to be that hydrogen exporter, which is absolutely key, and actually was how Australia became we go back and forth between number 1 and number 2 as the largest LNG exporter in the world, and government backing was exactly how that kicked off back in 1979. In addition to that, we have excellent renewable resources, and that's throughout the country, and that both solar and wind. And Australia is supportive of foreign investment, which is hugely important, especially when it comes to partnerships and exporting with key customer countries like Korea and Japan. That's absolutely vital. So all of those reasons are actually, it's right for partnerships to enable the energy transition with hydrogen, and we can pivot our energy source just like we did with LNG back in the 70s.
Yeah, very true. Pretty exciting future. The second question, and similar topic, is what are the main barriers to a hydrogen economy in Australia compared to in Europe, China, or elsewhere? So looking at it from the flip side.
Yeah, so I think potentially critical mass. We need that rate of adoption to become self-sustaining and creating future growth. And with such a small population, that we are disadvantaged in that regard as compared to Europe or China. Hard to get researchers, sometimes hard to get the technology up and moving. But on the flip side of that is that we punch above our weight when it comes to the technology that we do produce. So that might be a barrier, but I don't think it's going to be one that's big enough that's going to stop Australia from being a large hydrogen economy. And then the other one's probably the remoteness. It is we have to work that little bit harder to enable technology for hydrogen to be commercially viable, specifically for transport to our customer countries. Again, not something that will stop us, but that will be something that we have to work just that little bit harder.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Nothing that seems overly insurmountable. So there's some other questions obviously coming through, and I can put them to both of you, so feel free to decide who answers it. But the next one is, what are the materials and manufacturing challenges related to the production and use of hydrogen going forward?
I might jump in there, shall I? Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah. So yeah, I guess some of the manufacturing challenges, particularly, are around actually the energy systems themselves. So because this is kind of a growing market, the cost of that infrastructure, I touched on it again for refueling and vehicles. The cost of that infrastructure is still pretty high because the markets are still relatively small and emerging. So there's a lot of work now in I think trying to productize more the manufacture of hydrogen technologies so that those costs come down, and again the markets grow. So that's probably the biggest single thing. And there are challenges. There are materials and manufacturing challenges all through the various hydrogen value chains that I mentioned, be they around things like embrittlement of steel. Hydrogen actually reacts with metal, and so if you want to pipe hydrogen around in gas pipelines, you have to either use different materials or you have to modify those materials and appliances. So that's one specific example. There's a lot of work going on that through the Future Fuels Cooperative Research Centre, for instance, which is looking particularly at that gas replacement option for hydrogen. And costs in materials in fuel cells. So there's a number of very expensive elements in fuel cells and electrolyzer technology. So people are working hard to find new ways of new cheaper materials that can allow those reactions to occur efficiently and more cheaply. So I think was that everything there.
Yeah. No, that was spot on. I mean, there's the obvious challenges, but that sort of gives a bit more clarity to what they are. So thanks for that. Some other questions coming through. It's probably one for Andrea. How are you planning to store the hydrogen, and as in which form?
It's a good question, and Patrick could probably talk to the technical aspects. But as far as how do you store, how do you transport? When we get this question a lot, there are multiple ways that you can consider transportation. You can liquefy it like we do LNG, which we do, and we can get the energy to be really cold. It is significantly colder than LNG, so that is a problem. You can also store it in like a different form of a liquid organic hydrogen carrier. So you can add another chemical like toluene, and then you can transport it and store it as a different chemical basically. And then ammonia is another big storage and transport option. And they all three come with pros and they all three come with cons. And so the way I describe it is different strokes for different folks. I mean, we want to store, we want to produce and transport what the customer needs in the end. And so it depends a little bit too on where you want to store it, how long you want to store it, and what the customer ultimately needs. Do they need to use ammonia or do they need to use hydrogen? And these are all factors that you have to think about. I know, Patrick, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I might just add a little bit around the other storage mechanism, which is actually compression. Compression is a really compression of hydrogen is just a really critical cost in hydrogen energy systems, because it's quite compression of hydrogen to get it into a form where it's dense enough that you can store and transport it cost effectively. It's a big part of where innovation is really required, because of the energy requirement to do that. So for instance, you know, the fuel tanks of a hydrogen vehicle are typically running at 700 bar, 70 megapascals. So that's pretty high pressure, and they have some very significant materials innovations in developing those fuel tanks to allow that, which are quite fascinating. And then, you know, we're also looking at large scale hydrogen storage in things like underground formations. So we're starting to think about now ourselves and organisations like Geoscience Australia, how we might be able to find resources, underground resources for storing hydrogen at large scale, much as we do, much as natural gas is currently recovered from such resources. So quite a few different answers there. And as Andrea says, I think the key thing about moving hydrogen around is what do you really want to use it for? If you're happy with ammonia, you want to use it as a fertilizer, or you can actually use ammonia directly in turbines, then you don't need to recover the hydrogen. If you want to run a fuel cell vehicle, then somehow or other you've got to get back to the hydrogen that those systems run on. So yeah, quite a few different options there.
Thanks, Patrick. Yes, there's a number of questions coming through in the Q&A box that are sort of touching on a similar theme, which is this differentiation between, I suppose, what people understand to be just effectively carbonised hydrogen versus the green hydrogen option. And then just further to that, there's, I suppose, a more broadly a question around the geography here in Australia with respect to radiance or sunlight strength versus abundance of water, to sort of create a green hydrogen facility or environment. So do either of you have much of a view on, you know, should we be focusing or having the conversation more around the green hydrogen, or is that still a bit of a way off? And if so, do you think there is sort of holistic sort of state issues that need to be worked through to ensure that we're not reinventing the wheel across Australia, or sort of going to market around green hydrogen in a sort of uncoordinated manner?
Sure. Well, I think I'll take it first and hand over to Andrea shortly, I guess. I think the desire to get to green hydrogen is well thought through. I think you know, if you can start decarbonising your energy systems completely, then you should. You know, and so the faster we can do that, the better. But it's a challenge. It's a really big challenge for something like a hydrogen export industry. The amount of renewable energy that you really need to power an industry like that is just eye-wateringly huge, and so consequently that's going to take time and money to get to. And that's not to say we shouldn't do it, but I think we need to look at some nearer-term solutions which might be transitional to allow that industry to grow to that level. So I think we would see fossil fuel-based pathways, you know, taking absolutely into account the fact that they have to be decarbonised either through some form of carbon capture and storage or other carbon utilisation technology, as being an important way of getting the costs of those value chains down in the near term, while the renewable energy pathways have time to grow to where they need to be.
Yep. And yourself, Andrea,
about the water question as well, actually, Matt, was that right? There was questions about environmental.
Yes, there was two parts.
So it's you know, in terms of places to make hydrogen from renewable energy, of course, Australia's just a fantastic location. You know, specific areas, particularly around the northwest of Australia, you know, enormous solar footprints, you know, best in class globally. You know, wind energy and combined wind and solar opportunities as well. So, you know, in terms of renewable energy sources, fantastic opportunities for making hydrogen. But if you want to make hydrogen using those resources, yes, you do need water, and water in some places is relatively hard to come by. I think the overall argument is that the requirement for water is actually not as huge as people might think. If you actually do the numbers and work out how much water you actually need, it's not that different to something like our existing minerals industry, for instance, for a really large scale industry. So it can be done, and it can be done through desalination and processes like that. Again, you can use renewable energy to drive those processes, but there are absolutely certain places where you're not going to want to do it because the water is a challenge. So in those places, you may be piping water into those facilities to make use of that renewable energy. So I don't think there's anything insurmountable there, but sure, there are certainly places where you're going to have to think very carefully about whether it's doable.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And I suppose just for both of you, both from a sector perspective and a company sort of corporate perspective, there's a few questions coming through around fuel cells and whether it's undertaking trials or just the industry sponsoring, I suppose, the development of skills in that space, and what type of reskilling of the workforce or skilling of the workforce needs to take place. So just keen to get your thoughts on, are there any I suppose trials or projects that are being undertaken locally, and what's your views on I suppose future education and training requirements around just fuel cell technology?
I'm happy to go again. Andrea, do you want to have a crack first?
Yeah, I can jump in. So you may be aware of actually the projects that are looking deeper into fuel cell, Patrick, but from an education standpoint, we can definitely look to the likes of Europe and talking about learning from other countries and sectors who have done this. There are countries who are farther advanced in their hydrogen economy than Australia. So Japan, most of Europe, specifically Germany, and even California, looking to those economies who have already learned and gone through up the steep learning curve and actually really gaining from their insights and their failures and their successes will really help us propel our economy faster and not having to reinvent the wheel. And one of the opportunities that they have in Europe is called the Fuel Cell Joint Undertaking, which is a massive task force that's specifically looking at just that, everything around fuel cells, from production, getting people upskilled, putting it in universities, but the whole thing surrounding it. Korea, obviously, they're a really big fuel cell provider as well, so they're trying to upskill their people. I think it's really important for the STEM and even basic STEM in school programs, we're putting more effort into science, technology, and education and maths, adding fuel cell to that, because it is such an emerging technology, and everything, not just fuel cells, but everything around hydrogen needs to be started putting into schools and universities. Industry partnerships with universities like the Woodside Monash New Energy Partnership, that's super important, because what it's doing there is providing an opportunity for industry to ensure that key careers are being considered in universities. So anytime that you can collaborate with other states, countries, companies, economies who have been there, that will be really, really valuable.
Thanks, Andrea. Well, I think it is. Yeah, I mean, it's something that has to be built from the ground up, I suspect, locally. So it's an exciting opportunity, I think, both for corporate Australia and for groups like the CSIRO. There's a couple of probably easier ones coming through here. One is about sort of, I suppose, just government grants and therefore, in this instance, CSIRO sort of supporting projects that people are intending to put forward. Is that on the agenda at CSIRO around how to collaborate with scientists and industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we you know, a key element to the hydrogen industry mission, which I'm leading, is all about making those partnerships. So yeah, very much so. We're really keen to help you know, the new players and the new industry entrants into the hydrogen area. There is a huge, you know, harking back to the previous question, I think there is a huge opportunity for new technology companies, for new services companies, and skills and training companies, because hydrogen is a different gas. Even though we're probably going to use it in many ways similarly to the way we use existing gases, it does behave very differently. So there's a lot of new thinking required and new skills required, and things like safety. Of course, safety is always a paramount consideration when you're talking about flammable gases. So yes, we are very keen to help. We're not a funding agency in that sense, so please don't come asking for too much money from us. But we can help in some instances where it makes sense for us to do that. And fundamentally, we're always open to a conversation and to help people understand what opportunities might look like. And yeah, particularly we can actually help you. We obviously have a great experience of dealing with government funding programs at state and federal level as well. So we can help people access those through some of the experience we've got.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, there seems to be announcements for new funding every week almost. You know, ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, has funding that they've extended their remit, they've increased funding. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation is another funding mechanism. Just last week, the German governments announced that there would be feasibility funding to try to collaborate on the two countries and creating an international hydrogen supply chain. So, you know, we're constantly getting funding being thrown at this, which is absolutely vital. When you see the countries like Korea and Japan, for example, who are absolutely thriving, their governments supplying 50% of every hydrogen refueling station that's built throughout the country is being paid for by the government. 50% of the hydrogen Hyundai Nexo cells are being funded by the government. So it's absolutely a partnership with government, industry, and universities to make sure that this happens. And the partnerships, I hate to keep harping on about this, but it is a really good example about the Woodside Monash Energy Partnership, you know, helping with research to I guess further advance the technology readiness levels. Industry, university join together, but then also applying for government funding. That just helps ups the ante a little bit more and helps the dollar go a little bit further. I saw one of the questions coming through about seawater electrolysis. That's actually a research project that the Monash Woodside Partnership's looking at, is direct seawater electrolysis. So you do have to desalinate the water before it going into an electrolyzer. They're freshwater electrolyzers. And yeah, absolutely, taking out that step would be hugely helpful to decrease cost. And those sort of research partnerships will really help enable the future. At this stage, green hydrogen is roughly 3 times more expensive than blue hydrogen. So the blue hydrogen will enable the transition with natural gas, but yes, you do have to mitigate the carbon emissions. Ultimately, though, with funding and joint partnerships, working on things for green hydrogen, we will be able to get there.
Yeah. And just with that, obviously, Andrea, there was a question there around, is Woodside considering CCS with blue hydrogen? So that's, yeah. Okay. And
we are, yeah, absolutely, we are. That we're looking at CCS and CCU, so carbon utilization as well as carbon storage. There's a big project in Europe called the Northern Lights that's looking at, effectively, it's carbon storage as a service. So companies taking other companies' carbon and sequestering it in depleted reservoirs. We have that resource here in Australia, so there would be, I don't want to say no reason, but there definitely is a push and an incentive to look at how we could use the reservoirs here as well.
Fantastic. That's great. And great to see someone taking the lead. So that's, that's what you call making a difference. So there's some other questions here around that are probably relating to just the grid loads, where it sort of relates to, I suppose, power production and other issues around transmission lines. So do you guys sort of, have you given much thought to location for these types of facilities and existing infrastructure to support stations of this size and nature, given often that's where the biggest cost can be.
So I'll maybe jump in. Yeah. So you dropped out a bit there, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. So I think there's a lot of work going on around Australia in looking at these renewable energy zones and where you might deploy all of the aspects of renewable energy, including hydrogen. So yeah, I guess that's very site specific. Where you do these things, yeah, feasibility studies for how and where you deploy these technologies are going on, at many different levels in industry and in government right now. So yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah. And does that sort of extend to conversations around renewable energy parks, where you do have these green hydrogen facilities that are effectively powered by wind and solar and
yeah, very much so. I mean, there are some huge projects proposed in places like Western Australia, where they're looking at the multiple markets of electricity production for industrial use, for instance, but also then realizing that they have an extra resource that they can use either all of the time or part of the time when the demand isn't so great for the electricity. They can then produce either things like ammonia or hydrogen using those resources. So some of those, I mean, one way of thinking of electrolysis systems is as a flexible load on the grid. So if you have a flexible load on the grid, then you can start to balance out those renewable energy peaks and troughs that you get using hydrogen as the storage system, I guess, kind of like a battery.
Yeah, and I guess for our two demonstration projects that Woodside's looking at, we absolutely, the location was absolutely important in that it's a balance, because you want to get the right space where existing infrastructure for not just electricity, but also for transport. So where's your end user going to use the hydrogen? And so it is a fun balance, trying to find a good location in that regard. So our two locations are in Tasmania that has a lot of hydro and wind power, and then in WA at the Badgingarra Wind and Solar Farm, which is obviously both wind and solar. But then the consideration has to be, okay, well, where are we transporting it to? There's other mechanisms by you can buy renewable energy credits and that sort of thing. But if you're looking to, utilize curtailed power, that would be ideal. The power that can't be used elsewhere, and then using that for hydrogen production. So it is a fun balancing act, and there are tons of feasibility studies going on about this exact topic.
Yeah. And I think really interesting as well, some really interesting business cases emerging for trying to manage all of those complexities, some real clever financial thinking going into putting those projects together.
Yeah, it's great to see. And I suppose whenever you want to do anything of scale these days, typically China gets weaved into the equation in terms of cost of manufacturing and their ability to build things at speed. Are you seeing many partnerships and arrangements around leveraging each other's skill sets in our respective strengths for the hydrogen space?
Yeah, I'm aware of a couple of initiatives that are going on, particularly in universities in Australia. And there is certainly Chinese investment coming into various projects across Australia as well. I can't give you a specific example right now, but I'm aware that there are numbers of Chinese consortia who are really trying to get behind some of these projects for sure. And Andrea may have more knowledge of that.
No, yeah, that's pretty much covers it. I know that the partnerships are occurring, and Woodside's talking to partners in China as well, because as I mentioned, learning and leveraging from other countries who also have the same goals will really be how we excel the transition.
Yeah, very much agree on that. There's still a range of questions coming through, which is great. There's one there for you, Patrick, which you can always provide an answer later, but it's around just integrating hydrogen as a feedstock, along with, it says, coal, coke in steel mills and the iron ore industry.
Yeah, it's a big opportunity. So that's moving towards that green steel example that I gave. So just starting to take some of the natural gas and coal carbon sources out of the steel making process is seen as a really big opportunity, and it's one that a fairly recent piece of work by the Grattan Institute. If people would like to see that, really focus in on that as a key opportunity for again, large scale growth, large scale demand growth for hydrogen. So certainly, yeah, we're doing work in this area as well around how you can integrate hydrogen energy systems and feedstock systems into some of those sorts of processes. Yeah, it's a key opportunity.
Yeah. Yep, sure is. There's a few technical questions here, so I'm not sure, Andrea, feel free to jump in if there's anything that Woodside's doing in this space. There's one here around just the existing petrol stations being converted into the hydrogen stations. So I think that is given the rehabilitation requirements around petrol stations, I think that retrofit aspect will be interesting.
Yeah, it's key because they have existing land. You know, that's actually a really key component to hydrogen refueling stations. So anytime that you can leverage existing stations, especially ones with surrounding land, that's definitely going to be advantageous. And that's one thing we're looking into as well. I think we just as a company, we would like to see our fleets up at our sites in Karratha, WA, to be converted to hydrogen vehicles. You know, we want to walk the walk and even seeing how we can get hydrogen vehicles near our offices. And so we would have to also find or produce a hydrogen refueling station. So we're looking at options definitely to leverage existing infrastructure. I don't know if retrofit's the right word, but you can add a hydrogen bowser to an existing station, and then if you get the hydrogen trucked in or piped in, which is a little bit more complicated, or you can have on-site production if there is enough land. So absolutely, there's an opportunity to do that, and one that we're looking into.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point as well. I mean, it's probably worth pointing out I think the experience of refueling a hydrogen vehicle is not that dissimilar to the experience of refueling a petrol or diesel vehicle. So it does lend itself to that additional pump at a service station type approach. It's not a complete redesign of an entire piece of infrastructure.
Okay. No, that's going to be a huge opportunity for a lot of supply chain participants for that whole petroleum sort of reinvigoration or sort of reinvention sector. So just mindful, we've only got a minute or so to go, but one thing that people are inquiring about, Patrick, is just if you could just say a few words around the Chinese Academy of Science and CSIRO working together and what's going on that front.
Yes, so we've got a joint research funding program operating with the Chinese Academy. So we're working through now some of the some joint areas of R&D that we're interested in. It's fair to say it's probably focused on the production and storage side of the research equation, and obviously a lot of expertise, huge expertise in China and a fair amount in Australia too. So we're happy to be connecting with them and exploring new opportunities.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. And just for yourself, Andrea, just to finish on anything on the Woodside front around partnerships with sort of Chinese universities or sort of student programs, etc., that might accelerate development.
Yeah, sure. So just as a company, as I mentioned, we sell LNG into CNOOC. So we've been holding conversations with CNOOC and hoping that there could be some further partnerships there. We believe that China is a key customer country for Australia, and so we think that will easily translate into the hydrogen economy. But in addition to that, the Monash partnership, Monash actually has a campus in China, and so they're very well connected with other Chinese universities in there, and so we're having conversations regularly with the institutes and the Chinese universities that Monash is connected in with.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks, Andrea. And just should pass back to Virginia, but before I do, just from myself, thanks Patrick and Andrea for today. Massive topic, very broad range of issues, but it's a big issue for the future and in a very positive sense, and obviously has a very large level of connectivity with China, given their technical advancement, and even some other Asian neighbouring countries such as Japan, but also just around their scale and ability to bring projects to market quickly. So huge opportunity, and yeah, just on behalf of myself and the ACBC, thanks again for the Q&A session, but I'll pass it all back to Virginia for some final formalities.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Matt. That was terrific. And I do thank Andrea and Patrick so much for your wonderfully in-depth conversation and sharing of information. It's really interesting to look at the alternate uses of hydrogen, and thanks, Patrick, for sort of raising that, and the interesting information about knowledge sharing and partnerships and relationships, which we at ACBC are very conscious of in relation particularly to China. So it's heartening to hear about those developments. And Andrea, we'll definitely take you up on the visit to the Woodside building at Monash once we can all get on a bus and travel. But I think, Matt, you'd agree that our energy and resources working group in particular would be really interested in seeing that. This has been the first in our series with CSIRO. We're running programs through until next year with them, and we really appreciate them for their entering into a partnership with us to bring you this sorts of information, which is really leading the conversation. We also appreciate the support of ShineWing for today's event, Matt. So if you please pass that on to your colleagues. Also, Matt, thank you very much for your contribution today, and also your ongoing support of ACBC in Victoria. I just would like to shout out that also we have a special guest online. The Honourable Andrew Robb has zoomed in. He's obviously our former Trade Minister. So Andrew, thank you very much for your support and for joining us today. Everyone, please keep an eye on on your inbox for emails from us about our cutting edge events that will be coming up. We've got quite a few planned even for the rest of this year and certainly into next year, including more with CSIRO. So we do hope you'll join us, and thank you very, very much for zooming in today from all around Australia and from China, and we will welcome you to our next session. So thank you again, and thanks to our speakers too. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
You're well. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.